One of the things that we had a course yesterday on was looking at something NEDA, no evidence of disease activity. And what's particularly interesting about that is when we look at how we've done all of our clinical trials, the conversation about suppressing disease activity has looked at relapse rate reduction, MRI, new lesion formation and GAD-enhancing lesion activity, and also disease progression as measured by EDSS. So those three metrics is what we've used to do our clinical trials, and we always have said, let's, if we suppress this by this amount, this by this amount, this by this amount, that's kind of what we get. But we never pull it together as a full thing. So over the last couple of years, we've looked at no evidence of disease activity as a metric. So we can say, how good were we with this treatment in terms of preventing no activity, zero, on those three metrics. And when we looked at that for some of the clinical trials, the numbers are not all that impressive. They've been looking at it compared to placebo, and you're kind of in the 20s to 30% range of patients who have no evidence of disease activity. So you have clearly a big, a long way to go in terms of getting that under control. But some of the newer, more potent medications seem to be getting that into the 40, maybe even close to 50% range, which is quite remarkable. But some of the medications, as you go to more effective, may also bring on new safety concerns. So that's one issue. One of the other things that have come up recently is looking at something we call NEDA 4. So the three metrics that we've used in clinical trials has given us the information called NEDA 3, but now we're looking at something called NEDA 4, where we add an additional metric called brain volume loss. And that even brings it farther down, because some of the medications, maybe you'll get into the 30% range for some of the other three metrics. When you add brain volume loss, you can see that there's actually maybe even less patients who get into that conversation. But it's an important piece because, what we're ultimately trying to do with this metric is be able to suppress all the disease activity as best we can with whatever metrics we can detect. And we're starting to see that as you add more metrics into the mix, you may not be hitting everything with certain medications. Things that recently have been looked at are things like fatigue or cognition that are not currently in this NEDA conversation and are not necessarily evaluated in every clinical trial the same way. So that's something that's, I think, important, and I think as we move forward, more and more clinical trials will have some of these other metrics in there and be able to add that into the mix. You'll be able to see whether a medication is hitting some of these other metrics as well. So I think that we're going to be looking for more potent strategies going forward that will address these issues. You're always going to have to do it on an individual basis because everybody will have varying amounts of issues within that group of things we're going to call part of NEDA. But as a cohort, particularly in our clinical trials, that's always going to be something that's going to be viewed globally. How you apply that to the individual patient is always going to be an issue because, you may have a number that gets an average of all of the patients in that trial or whatever it is. But to say that that individual patient will get that benefit in these metrics that you're looking at is hard to say, right? So, everybody's so different in that regard. But it is something that gives us at least the ability to understand the compound and understand what metrics it's hitting on, and whether that applies to the individual patient will be dependent upon that patient's makeup and genetics and disease course. We have to, because a lot of times people come in with expectations that they're going to get the results in this clinical trial based on what we got, but that isn't always the case. It's a bell-shaped curve, and you have some people at one end who get great effects, and another end of the curve, they don't get as much benefit. So we do have to have the conversation so they understand what we're talking about here. But at the end of the day, if that didn't work out, we have another compound to go to, and we keep moving.